Story time! Hey there, little storytellers. Welcome to another magical tale. Today we're diving into the world of kindness and a little bit of magic with the story of the Shoemaker and the Elves. But before we begin, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to do so right now by clicking that red button below. Don't miss out on more amazing stories just like this one. Alright, now let's jump into the story of a shoemaker, some magical elves, and a big surprise. Once upon a time, there was a kind but poor shoemaker named Mr. Tim. He lived in a small, cozy workshop at the edge of a quiet town. Even though Mr. Tim worked very hard every day, he could only make one pair of shoes at a time. His hands were skilled, but his tools were old, and his materials were running out. One night, Mr. Tim looked at his last piece of leather and said, "This is all I have left. I'll use it to make one final pair of shoes tomorrow. I hope someone will buy them, so I can buy more leather." Tired from a long day, Mr. Tim left the leather on his workbench and went to bed, wishing for a bit of luck. But as soon as Mr. Tim fell asleep, something magical happened. Two tiny, clever elves appeared in his workshop. They were dressed in colorful clothes and had sparkly eyes that twinkled with joy. The elves looked at the piece of leather on the table and smiled. "Let's help Mr. Tim," said one elf. The elves worked all night, cutting and stitching with tiny hands that moved faster than the wind. By the time the sun rose, they had made the most beautiful pair of shoes anyone had ever seen. The shoes gleamed in the morning light, with perfect stitches and shiny soles. When Mr. Tim woke up, he couldn't believe his eyes. Who could have made these beautiful shoes, he wondered. They're perfect. Later that day, a customer walked into the shop and saw the shoes. "These are the finest shoes I've ever seen," the customer said, paying Mr. Tim a lot of money for them. Now Mr. Tim had enough to buy more leather. That night, he left the new leather on the table, and once again the little elves appeared. They worked their magic, crafting even more beautiful shoes than before. And every morning, Mr. Tim would wake up to find perfect new shoes waiting for him. As time passed, Mr. Tim became famous for his fine shoes, but he never forgot that the real credit belonged to the mysterious helpers who worked at night. One evening, Mr. Tim decided to find out who was helping him. He stayed awake and hid behind a curtain. As the clock struck midnight, the elves appeared, just as he had guessed. They worked quietly and happily, making shoes with great care. Mr. Tim smiled and thought, "These kind elves deserve a special gift for all they've done for me." The next day, instead of leaving leather, Mr. Tim made tiny clothes and shoes for the elves. He left them on the table as a surprise. That night, when the elves arrived and saw the gifts, their eyes sparkled with joy. They put on the new clothes and shoes, twirling and dancing around the workshop. "Thank you, Mr. Tim." The elves giggled before skipping out of the shop, never to be seen again. But even though the elves were gone, Mr. Tim continued to make beautiful shoes on his own. Thanks to the elves' kindness, his business flourished, and he lived happily ever after.